The first time it happened was on a night thick with silence. The streets of Lyon were empty, the neighborhood houses shut tight, and only the whisper of the wind pressed against the shutters of a modest home on the edge of town. Inside, the little house held its breath. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked steadily, and then without warning a scream tore through the walls. Lydia bolted upright in bed. Her husband Raphael was already swinging his legs to the floor. The cry came again, sharp and ragged, too fierce to belong to their son. They rushed into the small room painted green where 5-year-old Tomas usually slept curled up with a stuffed bear. But what they found froze them in place. The boy was standing straight on the mattress, his face pale, his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes were open wide, unblinking, glassy, with a strange intensity. His thin chest heaved with each breath, and when he spoke, the voice that emerged did not sound like the gentle boy they knew. It was deeper, deliberate, carrying a weight far older than 5 years. "I fought in the Legion," he said, each word pronounced with eerie clarity. "I held the line. We did not run." The words hung in the room like smoke. Raphael exchanged a quick, frightened glance with Lydia. She tried to gather the boy into her arms, murmuring his name, rocking him, as if to calm a fever dream. But Tomas resisted, his body stiff, his gaze fixed on something beyond the room, beyond the walls, perhaps beyond the present moment itself. That night they hardly slept. Tomas finally collapsed against his mother, his breathing returning to the gentle rhythm of childhood, as if nothing had happened. But the words lingered in their ears, a phrase without context, yet filled with the gravity of some ancient oath. The following morning, Lydia prepared breakfast, while Raphael sat across from Tomas at the small wooden table. The boy spooned his cereal quietly, his eyes still heavy with sleep. For a while, Raphael said nothing until he asked gently, "Tomas, do you remember what you said last night?" The boy looked up, puzzled. "About what you said? You fought in the Legion." For a moment, Tomas only blinked. Then his mouth curved into something between a frown and a thought. "Because I did," he answered simply, as if declaring he had once played in the park. "We had shields, big, heavy shields. My arm hurt from holding it." The spoon slipped from Lydia's hand and clattered on the counter. Over the next weeks, more words came. At unexpected moments, as though slipping through cracks in time, Tomas began to speak of places, battles, men, and commands. He described, marching with thousands of others, the dust rising, the metallic scent of sweat and iron filling the air. He spoke of a banner with an eagle golden and proud. Sometimes the words rushed out in fragments, urgent, tumbling over each other. Other times he spoke with solemn precision, as though recounting a ritual. "I was not afraid," he said one evening while playing with toy blocks. "The arrows fell like rain, but we held the wall of shields. The centurion shouted, and we locked our steps. One body, one heart." Neither parent had ever told him such things. In fact, he barely knew how to read. He had never seen a history book beyond the colorful pages of a kindergarten atlas. And yet the words he used, the rhythm of them, the images, belonged to another world entirely. Word spread quickly in the family. Lydia's sister came to listen, sitting cross-legged on the floor as Tomas explained how they trained in the heat, running with armor, carrying stones to make the arms strong. His grandmother clutched her rosary, whispering prayers. At school, the teacher noticed too. One afternoon, she pulled Lydia aside, her face a mix of concern and amazement. "He told the class today about something called a testudo. Do you know what that is?" Lydia shook her head. "It's a formation," the teacher explained. "Roman soldiers used it. Shields raised over the head, locking together to make a shell." I had to look it up myself. "He's 5, Senora. 5. That night, when asked, Tomas demonstrated by arranging his blocks in a square and covering them with a small notebook. "Like this," he said, "so the arrows cannot reach us. What unsettled Raphael most was not the knowledge itself, but the emotion behind it. When Tomas spoke of the Legion, he spoke with pride. His small chest swelled, his voice carried a strange conviction. It was not the imitation of a child pretending to be a warrior. It was remembrance. Sometimes in the quiet before bed, he whispered of things that made his parents shiver. They burned the village, he once murmured, his eyes half closed. The people screamed. We took the grain, the animals. The commander said it was necessary. And then, as if catching himself, he blinked and asked for a glass of milk, as though the darkness had never passed his lips. The family grew torn between fear and fascination. Lydia wanted to shield her boy, to silence the words before they spread further, before neighbors began to whisper. But Raphael felt a grim duty to record what he said, writing fragments in a notebook, certain that something extraordinary was unfolding before them. One evening, during a sudden thunderstorm, the boy woke again, crying out not in terror, but in command. His voice echoed through the little house. Form the line. Hold the standard. Do not yield. The words struck like lightning themselves, rattling dishes in the kitchen. He stood at the window, the flash of the storm lighting his small figure, his hand raised as if gripping an invisible sword. For Raphael and Lydia, there was no denying it anymore. This was not just imagination. Their son carried inside him the echo of a life that belonged to another age, another world. A life of blood, discipline, and steel. The following weeks brought a quiet storm into the household. What began as a strange phrase in the middle of the night soon became a pattern, a rhythm stitched into daily life. Tomas could be stacking blocks, tracing letters in his workbook, or chasing pigeons in the plaza. Suddenly, as if a curtain lifted inside his mind, the voice of another life would speak through him. At first, Raphael and Lydia tried to keep it contained, a secret inside their walls. But secrets have a way of leaking like water through cracked stone. By the time a month had passed, the schoolteacher, a priest, and even a local historian had already heard whispers of the boy who claimed he had once marched beneath the Roman eagle. It began with the teacher. Señora Alvarez was not a woman easily startled. She had taught 3 decades of children in León, seen every tantrum and every bright spark of talent. But she found herself unsettled by the strange authority with which Tomas spoke. One morning during a drawing lesson, she caught him carefully sketching rows of rectangles with pointed tips. "What are these, Tomas?" she asked, leaning over his desk. "Shields," he replied without hesitation. "We made a wall, like this." He tapped the lines with his pencil. Here the front row locked together. Then above, another row covered us from arrows. The enemy could not break through. The teacher frowned. "Where did you learn?" that Tomas looked at her with complete sincerity. "I remember." My arms ached from holding the weight. But I didn't let go. I was brave. That afternoon she pulled Lydia aside at the school gate. Her voice was low but urgent. "Señora, I think you should know your son speaks of things that no 5-year-old should know. He's describing Roman tactics, and he does it with such detail that I had to check a history book." He was correct. Lydia forced a smile, thanked her, and walked home with her heart racing. 2 days later, it was Father Miguel who heard the boy. The family had gone to Sunday Mass as always. Tomas sat between his parents, quiet and restless, tracing invisible shapes on the pew. When the priest raised the host, Tomas suddenly whispered, not in the innocent tone of a child, but in a voice filled with weariness. "We marched to Jerusalem," he said softly, staring at the altar. "So many of us. The city walls were tall, but we surrounded it. Smoke rose into the sky. People cried. I remember the gates breaking. The words chilled Lydia's blood. Father Miguel, who had paused mid-prayer, glanced down and then continued the liturgy, though his hands trembled slightly. After the service, he gently placed a hand on Raphael's shoulder. "Your boy speaks as though he carries a heavy burden," he murmured. "Sometimes children dream strange dreams, yes. But what I heard was no dream. It was confession." That night, Raphael began recording. He bought a small, second-hand tape recorder and set it on the table whenever Tomas began to speak. At first, the boy resisted, shy of the red blinking light. But when the memories came, he seemed unaware of the machine lost inside another century. Raphael filled 2 cassettes in less than a week. The voice that played back was unmistakably his son's. But the cadence, the vocabulary, the authority, those belonged to another man. On one tape, Tomas described the long road south, the sun burning their helmets, until the iron was too hot to touch, the smell of leather straps soaked with sweat, the calluses on his palms from gripping the wooden shaft of the pilum. On another, he whispered names, Latin words, guttural, broken by the child's Spanish tongue, yet still strangely precise. Marcus, Decimus, Flavius. He said them as though reciting a roll call of brothers-in-arms voices that had once shouted in his ears, footsteps that had once marched beside him. Raphael shared the tapes with a friend from university, a local historian named Ernesto Paredes. Ernesto listened with furrowed brows, adjusting his glasses again and again, sometimes rewinding, sometimes closing his eyes. "This is impossible," he muttered, finally setting the tape aside. "The boy speaks of things, details. Do you realize he described the exact shape of the pilum, how the weight of the iron head bends after striking? I didn't learn that until graduate school." "And he's 5, Raphael asked. "Then how do you explain it?" Ernesto shook his head slowly. "I can't. Unless someone has been secretly teaching him military history, this is... well, I don't know what this is." But Tomas was not always so confident in his recollections. There were moments when the memories frightened him, when his small body shivered as though ice had touched his spine. One evening during supper, he suddenly dropped his spoon, his eyes brimming with tears. "I killed a man," he whispered. His parents froze. He screamed. "I pushed my sword. Here." He touched his stomach with his little hand. Blood came out. So much. I thought of my mother, but I couldn't stop. Lydia knelt by his chair, wrapping her arms around him. "It was not you, mi amor. It was a dream." But Tomas shook his head violently. "It was me. I was there. I still feel his hand on my arm." That night he refused to sleep alone. He clung to his mother until dawn. The paradox gnawed at them all. On one hand, Tomas was still a child he loved. Chocolate milk cartoons and drawing animals. On the other, he spoke with the soul of a man hardened by campaign's violence and discipline. Sometimes the 2 identities overlapped in unsettling ways. When playing with other children, he would line them up, barking commands, insisting they march in formation. He grew frustrated when they didn't obey, shouting words. None of them understood sinistra dextera, left, right. The other children laughed at first, but then grew uneasy. Parents began to whisper. One mother pulled Lydia aside at the market and asked bluntly, "Why does your son play at being a soldier of Rome?" "It frightens the others." Lydia could only shake her head, helpless. The more the boy remembered, the more the family feared. Yet beneath the fear lay fascination. Ernesto began visiting weekly, taking notes, asking careful questions. Father Miguel prayed with the child, though he confessed to Raphael privately that he was unsure whether he was dealing with a case of reincarnation possession or something else entirely. Through it all, Tomas remained both ordinary and extraordinary, laughing at cartoons, crying when he scraped his knee, then moments later speaking of the clash of swords and the heat of battle. And with each passing week, the memories grew sharper, darker, and harder to dismiss. The whispers of the boy's strange memories spread beyond Leon, like ripples in water. What had begun as a family secret and a handful of cassette tapes was now leaking into the wider world. Ernesto, the historian, could not keep silent. He confided in a colleague from the university who in turn mentioned it at a faculty gathering. Before long, 2 professors of classical history were asking cautious questions about a 5-year-old who spoke of phalanxes and Roman eagles as if he had marched beneath them himself. At home, the weight of these conversations pressed heavily on Raphael and Lydia. They had wanted to shield their son from attention, but it was becoming impossible. Tomas spoke with increasing clarity, and his words were no longer vague. He named places, commanders, and orders that no child could have invented. One evening, as the sky outside burned red with sunset, Raphael set the recorder on the table. Tomas was quiet at first, playing idly with a toy car spinning its wheels with a finger. Then, as if a tide rose inside him, his posture shifted. He sat straighter, his eyes distant. They called him Vespasianus, he said slowly, carefully. He was the commander. His son Titus was there too. We camped outside the great walls. We built towers, rolled them close. The city, it was Jerusalem. Raphael's hand trembled as he turned up the volume on the recorder. Ernesto leaned forward in his chair. "What did you see, Tomas?" he asked softly. The boy's lips trembled. Smoke. The temple burned. People screamed and the stones cracked with fire. We carried loot, gold, silver cups. The eagle standard shone above us. I was proud, but also I was afraid of God's anger. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the tape. Lydia pressed her hand to her mouth. Ernesto's pen scratched furiously across the page. When Ernesto compared the tape later with historical texts, he nearly dropped his notes. The boy had spoken names correctly: Vespasian and Titus, the generals of Rome who besieged Jerusalem in the 1st century. Even the detail about the golden eagle standard matched the accounts of Josephus, the Jewish historian. He cannot know this, Ernesto muttered to himself. It's not in school books. Not even in most libraries here. Where does he get it? Word reached Father Miguel, who contacted the diocese. Soon a visitor arrived, a quiet, stern-faced priest from Mexico City sent to observe. He introduced himself as Father Alonso, carrying a small leather notebook and a rosary worn smooth by decades of prayer. In the living room, he sat across from Tomas, who was drawing soldiers with shields. "Tell me," Hijo Alonso said gently. "Who are these men you draw?" "They are my brothers," Tomas replied without looking up. "We marched together. If one ran, we all died. So we stayed." The priest exchanged a quick glance with Raphael and began asking questions in Latin. To their astonishment, Tomas responded haltingly, clumsily, but with recognizable words. Words he had never been taught. "Gladius," he said, pointing to a crude drawing of a sword. "Aquila," he whispered, tapping the eagle on a banner. Then, after a pause, Centurio. Father Alonso closed his notebook slowly, his face pale. "This is not a trick," he said. "The boy is speaking fragments of Latin. I do not know what to call this." Not all reactions were sympathetic. Some neighbors began to gossip. A woman selling fruit at the corner muttered that strange things happened in that house. Children in the street teased Tomas, calling him El Soldado Fantasma. A few whispered darker words, Brujo Maldito. Lydia wept at night, fearing for her son's future. Raphael, though shaken, clung to the idea that documenting everything might one day protect Tomas, proving that he was not insane, not possessed, but simply extraordinary. The boy himself seemed torn. At times he spoke with pride, reliving the discipline and glory of the Legion. At other times he woke from nightmares, screaming, his small body drenched in sweat. "I see their faces," he whispered one dawn, clinging to his mother. "Men I killed. They begged me to let them live. But I had orders." His words carved scars in the hearts of his parents. He was 5 years old, and yet he carried the weight of blood. One afternoon, Ernesto brought an atlas, thick and heavy, its pages filled with maps of the ancient world. He placed it in front of the boy. "Can you show me where you were, Tomas?" he asked gently. The child traced his finger along the Mediterranean coast, pausing at Italy. "Here is Rome," he said with certainty. Then he slid his finger eastward across the sea. "And here? Judea. We marched here." His finger stopped at Jerusalem. Ernesto swallowed hard. "How do you know?" "Because I was there," Tomas said simply. "The dust choked me. The sun burned my skin. I still feel it." By now, rumors reached beyond Leon. A local journalist came knocking, eager to publish a sensational story about the boy who remembers Rome. Raphael refused, slamming the door. But the pressure mounted. If they hid, the rumors would only grow. If they spoke, the boy would be exposed to ridicule or worse. Father Miguel urged caution. Ernesto urged documentation. Lydia urged silence. And Tomas, he only wanted to play to watch cartoons, to be 5 years old. But the memories did not stop. One night during a heavy rain, the boy woke again. He stood at the foot of his parents' bed, whispering urgently. "They broke through our lines," he said, his voice hoarse. "The Parthians rode fast. Their arrows blackened the sky. We raised shields, but men screamed, horses trampled us. I fell. I thought I would die." His parents stared, their hearts breaking. He was not inventing fairy tales. He was reliving battles that had ended nearly 2,000 years ago. For Ernesto the historian, the case was already beyond academic curiosity. He confided to Raphael in hushed tones, "If the church confirms this, your son could become the most studied case of memory beyond life and history. But they may also try to silence it to protect doctrine." Raphael clenched his fists. "He is my son, not a specimen." And yet, as Tomas grew more precise in his recollections, it became clear more eyes would soon turn toward their quiet house in Leon. Scholars, priests, skeptics, and seekers would all want a piece of the boy who claimed with unwavering certainty, "I fought in the Legion." By the end of the summer, the case of the boy in Leon could no longer be contained. What had begun as hushed conversations between family priest and historian now attracted outsiders, strangers who arrived uninvited, knocking on the modest wooden door of Raphael and Lydia's home. Some came with notebooks, others with cameras, and a few with crucifixes clutched tight in their hands. Each visitor carried a different intention: curiosity, skepticism, fear, or the hope of witnessing a miracle. One group arrived in a battered van with the logo of a university in Mexico City. They introduced themselves as psychologists and asked to conduct simple memory tests. Another arrived with a journalist camera flashing before Lydia could protest. Father Alonso, who had once been cautious, now urged them to cooperate. "Transparency is the only protection," he told Raphael. "If you hide him, the rumors will grow darker." So, reluctantly, the family agreed to let a small team conduct interviews. Ernesto, ever the mediator, insisted on being present. They began in the kitchen, transformed into a makeshift study. A tape recorder clicked, Notebooks opened, pens hovered. Tomas sat at the table, swinging his legs shy under the attention. "Tell us your name," one psychologist said gently. "Tomas," the boy whispered. "And how old are you, 5?" The questions grew stranger. "Do you remember another name? A name before Tomas?" The boy's brows furrowed. He looked down as though listening to something deep inside. Finally, in a voice low and unsteady, he said, "Gaius. Gaius Marcellus." The researchers froze. Ernesto scribbled the name furiously, his pulse quickening. "And where did you live, Gaius?" "In Rome," the boy said. "Near the river. My father was a baker. But I joined the Legion. I wanted to bring honor." Raphael's hands tightened on the edge of the chair. His son's Spanish was simple, childish, yet within it lived a man's history. The psychologists pressed further. "Can you tell us about training?" Tomas straightened, eyes distant. "We carried shields until our arms broke. We marched until our feet bled. We threw pila at wooden posts again and again. If we faltered, the centurion's cane struck our backs." One of the psychologists leaned forward. "What is a pilum?" Tomas blinked at him, surprised by the ignorance. "A spear, heavy with an iron tip. After it struck, it bent so the enemy could not throw it back." Ernesto closed his eyes. The boy's description matched exactly the ancient sources, but not all questions found answers. When asked for dates or specific years, Tomas grew confused. Numbers slid through his fingers like water. Yet when asked about sensations, smells, or sounds, his responses grew vivid and immediate. "The sand was hot beneath my sandals," he whispered. "I tasted dust. I smelled blood, metal sweat. The trumpets were loud, too loud." The psychologists exchanged wary glances. One of them muttered, "This is not imagination. It's memory." Father Miguel remained cautious. He warned the family not to be swept away. "The devil can mimic knowledge," he said quietly to Lydia. "Do not forget that possibility." But Lydia, watching her son cradle his glass of milk with trembling hands after each session, could not believe he was possessed. To her, he was still her child, fragile and innocent, carrying something he could not understand. Weeks passed, and the boy's words became darker. In one recording, he whispered of crucifixions, describing how they lined the roads with bodies after battle. "We left them hanging so others would fear us," he said, his small voice, flat eyes, unfocused. Another time, he described the face of a centurion, scarred and cruel, who forced them forward when they hesitated. He said, "Rome is eternal, and we are nothing. If we ran, he would kill us himself." The weight of these confessions pressed hard on the family. Raphael began drinking at night, unable to silence the echoes of battles he had never fought, but now lived through his son's lips. One evening, Ernesto brought an old coin, a denarius he had purchased years ago. He placed it before Tomas on the table. "Have you seen this before?" he asked. The boy picked it up, rolling it between his fingers. His eyes widened. "Yes. We were paid with these, 1 denarius for a day. But I saved little. The dice took it." Raphael's breath caught. The boy could barely add and subtract, yet he spoke casually of wages and gambling details, Ernesto later confirmed as historically accurate. The press finally broke through the family's resistance. A small article appeared in a local paper. 5-year-old boy claims past life as Roman soldier. Soon after, strangers began appearing outside the house, some kneeling to pray, others shouting accusations of witchcraft. The bishop's office issued a statement urging discretion. Scientists requested permission to run neurological tests. Ernesto argued fiercely with journalists at the door. And through it all, Tomas remained caught in a storm he did not create. The boy himself began to feel the burden. "I want it to stop," he whispered one night to his mother. "I don't want to remember anymore." Lydia held him close, stroking his hair. "You are here now, mi amor. You are Tomas. Whatever happened before, it cannot hurt you." But the boy shook his head. "It hurts still. The sword was heavy. The screams are loud. When I close my eyes, I see them." She wept silently, unable to protect him from the ghosts of another life. At last, Father Alonso returned, this time with two companions, one a psychiatrist, the other a representative from the Vatican. They sat in the small living room, notebooks ready. The psychiatrist asked clinical questions, testing for suggestion, imagination, or exposure to books. The Vatican man asked theological ones. Did Tomas feel a presence guiding him? Did he see visions beyond memory? Was there a message for the living? The boy only repeated what he always had. "I was a soldier. I fought. I killed. And I died." The words settled heavily in the room. No message, no prophecy, only testimony. When they left, Father Alonso spoke quietly to Raphael. "The Church will not declare this miracle nor possession. They will say it is a mystery. That is all." Raphael nodded bitterly. A mystery was no comfort when his son cried himself to sleep. But Ernesto, clutching his overflowing notebook, whispered a different thought. The boy is history itself speaking. If we listen, perhaps we will understand something greater about memory, about the soul. The nights grew colder as autumn arrived. Tomas played less and spoke more, his childish laughter fading beneath the weight of ancient memories. In the quiet of the house, the sentence repeated again and again, etched into the walls, into the hearts of his parents, into every tape that spun beneath the red light of recording. I fought in the Legion. I held the line. I did not run. By the time the leaves in the plaza turned brittle and brown, the weight of the boy's memories had become unbearable. What had once been scattered fragments of another life now pressed against him like a tide threatening to drown the small child inside. Lydia noticed it first in his eyes, the way they no longer shone with the careless brightness of childhood. Instead, they carried a haunted distance, as though he were both here and elsewhere at once. Raphael tried to distract him with soccer balls and comic books, but Tomas would abandon them, quickly drawn instead to reenact formations with pebbles, or to mutter words in half-broken Latin under his breath. More than once, neighbors walking past their windows heard the boy calling orders into the air. Testudo form, the line. Do not yield. His voice was so commanding that grown men passing by slowed their steps. Shivers running down their spines. The nightmares became relentless. Nearly every night, Tomas woke drenched in sweat, clutching his chest, screaming that he had been pierced, that he was bleeding, that the ground was cold beneath him. Sometimes he clawed at his body, as though trying to pull out an invisible arrow. Other times he gasped for water, whispering that he had marched 3 days without a drop. One dawn, after a particularly violent episode, he confessed to his mother in a trembling voice, "I think I know how I died." Lydia's heart seized. "No, mi amor, don't say it." But the boy pressed on, his eyes wide with the terror of memory. It was in the desert. The sun was burning. We fought men on horses, so many horses. They circled us, arrows falling. One struck me here. He pressed his small hand to his stomach. I fell I couldn't breathe. My brothers kept fighting, but I lay on the ground. I saw the sky turning red. And then, nothing. Lydia wept silently, rocking him as though he were a baby again. Ernesto, ever the historian, listened to the recording of this confession with trembling hands. He compared it with accounts of Roman campaigns in the East, noting the tactics Tomas described. Parthian cavalry arrows blackening the sky, legionaries holding their line until collapse. "He is describing Carrae," Ernesto whispered, referring to the infamous defeat of Crassus in 53 BCE. But how could he know? When he presented this to the professors in Mexico City, they argued heatedly. Some called it a fraud, others a psychological phenomenon, still others a possible case of reincarnation. Yet all agreed the boy's knowledge was uncanny, impossible to explain by chance. Meanwhile, pressure mounted from the outside world. A television crew camped at the end of the street, hoping for a glimpse of the child. Religious pilgrims arrived with candles and prayers, convinced Tomas was a sign of the end times. Skeptics arrived too, shouting insults, calling the family liars, accusing them of exploiting a boy for attention. Raphael grew weary of guarding the front door. He shouted at journalists, shoved away microphones, slammed the gate in the faces of strangers. But still, they came. The family's once quiet street was now a theater of curiosity and fear. Inside the house, Tomas seemed almost oblivious. His battles were fought within. One evening, the boy gathered his parents and Ernesto around the table. His face was pale, his voice thin, but steady. "I remember the last moment," he said. "I was lying on the ground. My blood was hot at first, then cold. The dust was in my mouth. I thought of my mother in Rome. I wanted to tell her I was sorry. Then I saw the eagle standard falling. I heard men crying out, and then it was dark." He paused, tears filling his eyes. "I don't want to see it anymore. Please make it stop." Lydia clutched his hand, whispering prayers. Raphael, his own eyes wet, swore, "It will stop, Hijo. We will protect you." But inside, both parents knew they had no power over the flood of memories consuming their son. The Vatican observers returned this time more solemn, more deliberate. They interviewed the boy again, asking for details of his death, his commanders, his service. Each time, Tomas answered with the same quiet certainty. When they left, they gave no verdict, only promises to report to higher authorities. For the Church, the case was a puzzle without a safe resolution. To admit reincarnation would contradict doctrine. To declare possession would risk scandal. So they remained silent, leaving the family adrift between belief and denial. The turning point came one stormy night. Lightning cracked over Leon, thunder rolling like distant drums of war. Tomas woke screaming, thrashing against his sheets. When Raphael rushed in, the boy was shouting orders in Latin, his voice loud and commanding, nothing like a child's. "Hold the line. Advance, advance." Then suddenly his cries broke. His small hands clutched his chest, his face twisted in pain. "I'm dying," he screamed. "Tell my mother. Tell her I am sorry." Raphael held him tightly, sobbing, whispering, "You are my son. You are here. You are safe." But Tomas only gasped, his eyes wild, until at last he collapsed against his father's chest, exhausted, his body trembling like a leaf. That night, after he finally fell into restless sleep, Raphael carried him back to bed and swore to Lydia that they would no longer allow strangers, scientists, or priests to question him. "No more," he said fiercely. "He is not a specimen. He is our boy." Yet even as they tried to protect him, the memories continued. For weeks, Tomas repeated fragments of his last battle arrows. Dust, blood, the fall of the eagle. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the intensity began to fade. The nightmares grew less violent, the confessions less frequent. By winter, the boy spoke less often of Rome, and more of simple things again. Soccer cartoons, the taste of sweet bread from the bakery. It was as if the tide that had once surged so violently inside him was finally receding, leaving behind only traces of another life. For Ernesto, the historian, this was bittersweet. "We are losing the voice of Gaius," he told Raphael quietly, "but perhaps that is merciful. Perhaps Tomas deserves to be only Tomas again." And indeed, though the tapes remained dozens of hours, of a child speaking with the memories of a soldier, the boy himself seemed to forget. By spring, he no longer spoke of shields or legions. When asked, he only shrugged and said, that was just a dream. But for those who had heard him, the parents, the priest, the historian, the men from the Vatican, there was no forgetting. They had looked into the eyes of a 5-year-old and seen for a moment the soul of a man who had marched and bled 2,000 years ago. And though the world moved on, though Tomas returned to his childhood, the words still echoed in memory, haunting and eternal. "I fought in the Legion. I held the line. I did not run." By the time spring had fully settled over Leon, the boy who had once spoken of war and blood seemed to drift back into the ordinary world of childhood. The neighbors who, for months, had whispered and speculated, noticed him kicking a ball again in the dusty street, his laughter echoing like any other child's. The haunted look that had so unsettled his mother began to soften, replaced by the mischief of a boy chasing pigeons and begging for sweet bread from the panaderia. For Lydia, the change was both a blessing and a source of unease. Each morning she woke thankful that Tomas had passed the night without screaming. But she also found herself wondering, had it really happened? Had her son truly carried the memories of a man long dead? Or had the storm of attention created something that never was? When she opened the drawer that held the cassettes, she knew the answer. The voice captured there was unmistakable calm, measured far older than 5 years. It was real, and yet it was fading. Raphael, who had once guarded the door against journalists and pilgrims, now guarded the future more fiercely. He told anyone who asked that his son was fine, that the strange episodes were over, that there was nothing left to see. When a reporter appeared at the gate, Raphael simply closed it without a word. The boy would be protected, even if that meant silence. Still at night, when the house grew quiet, Raphael sometimes took out a tape and listened. The boy's small voice spoke of legions of dust, of steel, and death. Raphael would sit with his head in his hands, torn between awe and sorrow. He wanted to forget to erase it all, yet some part of him feared that if he did, he would lose something extraordinary, something that had brushed against eternity. Ernesto the historian visited less frequently now. He no longer asked questions of Tomas, no longer brought books or maps. Instead, he came as a friend, sitting with Raphael in the patio, sipping coffee while the boy played with marbles nearby. Yet Ernesto's notebooks were filled, and he guarded them jealously. He knew he had witnessed something no history book could explain. "This will haunt me all my life," he told Raphael one evening. "Not because it is frightening, but because it forces us to admit how little we know. We search ruins, we translate fragments of stone, and yet your son spoke of the past with more clarity than all our libraries combined." Raphael said nothing. He only watched his son's laughter ring out under the orange tree, a sound he prayed would never again be interrupted by the voice of another life. Father Miguel continued to visit the family, though his role had changed. No longer did he probe with questions about possession or reincarnation. Instead, he came to share prayers to bless the house and to remind them that mysteries sometimes remain mysteries. "The church will not speak of this again," he told Lydia softly. But you must not let that trouble you. Whether it was memory dream or something beyond, your son is here safe. That is what matters. Lydia nodded, though in her heart she still carried the image of her child screaming in Latin during a storm, his tiny hands clutching at invisible wounds. Safe, yes, but marked forever. As the months passed, the remnants of the phenomenon faded further. The nightmares ceased. The strange words disappeared. When asked about the Legion, Tomas only frowned in confusion, as though hearing about a distant story that had nothing to do with him. I don't remember, that he would say before running off to play. And yet from time to time small echoes surfaced. One afternoon he built a fort from chairs and blankets, arranging them in a square. When his cousin asked why, Tomas shrugged and said, "It keeps arrows out." Then, as quickly as it had come, the thought vanished, replaced by laughter and play. For his parents, each echo was a reminder the past was still there, hidden beneath the surface, though mercifully dormant. The world too moved on. The reporters stopped coming pilgrims, no longer lit candles outside their gate, and the university scholars filed their notes away in dusty cabinets. For the family, silence returned, though never quite as peaceful as before. They had seen too much to believe life was ordinary. In the end, the boy was allowed to be a child again. He started school, made friends, skinned his knees, and filled his notebooks with drawings of animals and superheroes instead of shields and swords. He grew, and with growth came forgetfulness. What had once been an overwhelming flood of memories became nothing more than faint ripples in a dream he no longer understood. And yet for those who had been there, for those who had listened, the story lingered. Ernesto often reread his notes late at night, staring at the pages until his eyes blurred, asking himself whether he had truly heard a child speak of Carré and Jerusalem. Father Alonso returned to Mexico City, submitting his report that ended with the word inexplicable. The Vatican filed it away without comment. For Raphael and Lydia, the tapes remained hidden in a drawer, a silent archive of the strangest months of their lives. They never played them for others again, but sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and the world seemed thin, one of them would press play, and the voice of their little boy would echo back from the machine, not speaking of cartoons or games, but declaring in solemn tones, "I fought in the Legion. I held the line. I did not run." Years later, when Tomas himself was old enough to ask why strangers had once come to their door, why old notebooks in Ernesto's study carried his name, his parents smiled faintly and told him only that he had been a very imaginative child. He laughed at the idea, shaking his head, and went back to his books and games. But sometimes when he stood alone beneath the blazing Mexican sun, he would squint at the horizon as though searching for something long forgotten. And though he could never name it, he would feel deep in his bones the echo of marching feet, the weight of a shield, the taste of dust and iron. And then, as quickly as it came, the feeling would vanish, leaving only a boy alive and free in a world that would never truly know what he had once remembered.